Hi developers, in this video we'll learn how to deploy a Docker container into Azure Kubernetes Service AKS. For that we'll be using the YAML files. We'll have a YAML file for deployment in which mainly we'll specify which Docker container to use and also the number of replica that we want to create. Each replica or each pod will run a Docker container. A second YAML file we'll be using is the service, and the service will be used in order to route the traffic coming from our users to the pods or to our Docker images. For this part we'll be using the load balancer, which is available as a service on Microsoft Azure. Then we'll try to use kubectl in order to deploy those files to create this application onto AKS. Then we'll try to scale the application. So instead of using 3 pods, we want now to use 10 pods. So we'll learn how to do that and how to apply those new changes. Then if we don't need anymore our application running on AKS, we can go and delete it. So we'll see how to do that. In the previous video we have saw how we can do that from the create right here using the dashboard, where we have this simplified form, but today we want to do that from using the YAML deployment files. In the previous video we saw how we can create this file. So we said that here we'll have the deployment and also we have the service, and all is inside a file with the extension .yaml. So for the deployment it will describe how should our app deploy it. So this one it will have a name, then it will have a selector name. This one will be used if I want to reference my application from other apps. Then for the template we are specifying a tag for our template. Then we'll be specifying the container that should be used. Here we are specifying a name for this container and also the path from where to find this container, and this one the container that we have already created in the next video. That's the container that runs my Angular application with the tag v1. You can find this container and the link right here. But of course you can use and run your own container from Docker Hub. We said that here the container port should be the port 80. Then for the second part of this file, which is the service, here we'll have the API version as v1. This one is the API used by Kubernetes in order to read this file, validate it, and then run it to deploy it to Kubernetes. The metadata is the name of this service. I call it Angular-service. Then the selector to be able to reference it from other services, for example. Then the ports, which will use the TCP, it will point to port 80. But here for the node port and for the type, at the third video we used the node port because we said we want to deploy to Kubernetes on our local machine, and in our local machine we don't have the load balancer. But now we want to deploy to Microsoft Azure, and there I have the option to use the load balancer. So I switch this one from using the node port to use the load balancer. But I don't want to do that inside this file, so I create a new file for a deployment specific to Microsoft Azure. So I'll go and copy this file, then I'll paste it inside the same directory. And here I go and rename it to say this is for Azure. And the first or the original file is gonna be the one used inside my local Kubernetes install. So for the Azure file, I'll go and say this no longer uses the node port, but it uses the load balancer. And with the option of using the load balancer, right here I don't need to specify the node port, so I can get rid of this property right here. Great. You see that here I have colors for my YAML. So you can get that through this extension, Kubernetes extension, which you can get it from the extensions menu inside VS Code. Here you go and look for Kubernetes, and you will get this extension, which you can install it to give you colors and support for Kubernetes. So now we have the description or the deployment file in order to create a deployment and a service for our application. Now we want to run it. How we can do that? So we can do that the same way as we have deployed the file to our local Kubernetes. So here from the command line, we need to connect to Azure, and we already done that. If you didn't, then when you go to your Azure or to your AKS service, you can click on View Kubernetes Dashboard right here, and then it will give you those 4 steps in order to install the Azure CLI. Then run those 3 commands in order to connect to Microsoft Azure. I have already done this from the previous video. So now I'm connected to AKS on Azure through my kubectl. And from here, I'm ready to run the deployment files. So let's go and do that. Here I'll use the terminal from inside VS Code. So here I'll go to View, Terminal, then right here. Let's make sure we have the deployment file inside the Angular app. So I'll need to cd inside Angular app. Then from here, I do have my deployment.azure YAML. I'll go and use the command for deploying a new a deployment and service file. So I'll go and say kubectl apply -f, then the name of my deployment file. I run this command, and here it will tell me that it created a deployment for an application called Angular deployment. Then it created the service for Angular service. Now if we go back to the dashboard for our Azure AKS, we go to refresh. So just make sure here we have already some pods and some deployments for the previous application that we have created from the dashboard. So now I'll go and refresh, and in addition to those resources, I should be able to see my new application deployed from YAML files, which is right here, the Angular deployment, and with the pods for my Angular deployment. Here you see the difference between the other or the old pods and the new pods, and here you have now 15 pods, because the previous deployment we have deployed 10 Angular app pods, and here we are deploying how many? Here we are telling it to deploy 5 pods, this value inside the replica property. Great. Then that creates the service, and here it's still in progress, its creation, because it will take a bit of time in order to create an external IP that is accessible from end users. This will take about 3 to 4 minutes. So let's wait a while until it's available. And now it's available. So if I can go and click on the link, this will open an external IP which maps to my pods that are running my 5 instances of Docker image for my Angular application. And here it is, my Angular app running on Azure Kubernetes Service using Kubernetes and Docker images. Now if we go back to Microsoft Azure portal, right here we could click on monitor container health right here to get some insights and get some metrics about the health of the pods, the Kubernetes cluster, and the deployments and the services and so on. So here we can start from the by the cluster. We see here the CPU utilization, the memory utilization, and some other useful insights We can also see the check the status for our nodes right here. Then we can also see the controllers, the containers, and so on. We can also see the other option right here, which is for the logs. So if I click on it, then right here we'll be able to get some logs coming from a Kubernetes cluster. Where here we have the list of logs, and we can query those table or those list of logs using the query syntax right here. So we can get those insights or those metrics from the Azure portal, but we can also get those from using the command line, because right here I'm connected to my cluster on Azure. I can go and say kubectl get services, for example, and this will get me the status of my services. Great, I hope you liked this video and you learned how you can deploy simply a Docker image inside Azure Kubernetes service in just a few minutes. So join me in the next video where we'll be deploying the YAML deployment files, not through the command line, but through DevOps CI/CD pipelines, where we'll take the source code, we'll create the Docker image, we'll push it to Docker Hub, then from the deployment or the CD pipeline, we'll get those image, and then we'll deploy it to our Kubernetes service on Azure after creating the connection to it. So we'll have the complete CI/CD pipeline to run our application from source code to deployment into AKS. So see you in the next video. Thank you.